Hi. In this video, I'd like to explore the phenomenon of trolling. This topic was suggested by Maricela C., who commented on my video on depression. So many thanks to you, Maricela C., for that idea. I guess that in today's world, trolling can occur in any number of contexts. However, in this video, I'd like to focus specifically on internet trolling, first because it seems to be the most common type, and also because the internet is where the term originated some years ago. And I'd like to explore internet trolling first by outlining a taxonomy of it based upon my own personal experience, and then by exploring some of the features common to all trolling, and finally by outlining what I feel are some of the positive aspects of trolling. So let's start with the taxonomy of trolling. It seems to me that most internet trolling falls into one or more of 5 fundamental categories. Perhaps the purest and most basic of these 5 types is what I call sadistic trolling. The goal of sadistic trolling is simply to inflict as much emotional pain as possible on the victim. This kind of trolling often takes the form of direct insults and belittlement, which span the range from barnyard crudities such as the venerable and time-worn "you suck" and "fuck you, asshole," to comparatively sophisticated forms of disparagement such as "You, my good sir, are but an unmitigated scoundrel and varlet." And of course, there's a wide middle ground between those two extremes, which I find consists largely of terms taken from the Three Stooges lexicon, terms such as idiot, moron, and the occasional retard. However, sometimes sadistic trolling takes the more sophisticated and personal form of trying to locate the victim's psychological buttons and then pushing them as hard as possible. For instance, if a sadistic troll locates a potential victim who's using, say, a unicorn avatar, the troll is likely to comment on how stupid unicorns are, how childish it is to care about them, how they're indicators of a deficient fantasy-prone personality, etc., etc. But, of course, the goal remains the same, to inflict as much emotional pain as possible. However, beyond sadistic trolling, another fairly common type consists of what I call sport trolling. Here, the troll's primary interest is in arguing and fighting. Trolls of this type are looking for combative responses, and their goal is to engage in a kind of one-upsmanship contest. The point of sport trolling is to gain a sense of intellectual or moral superiority while simultaneously producing a sensation of inferiority in their defeated opponents. I find that sport trolling is often disguised as intellectualized commentary, but intellectualized commentary whose real underlying purpose is to establish dominance over other people. Of course, it's also fairly common to combine sadistic trolling and sport trolling. For instance, trolls who are combining these two types will often pose quasi-intellectual arguments larded with crude insults like "you idiot," or sometimes more linguistically adroit ones like "you gibbering jackanapes." A third and related form of trolling is what I call nitpicking trolling. This form of trolling is about fault-finding, usually of a trivial or picayune nature. For instance, trolls of this type will punctiliously correct their victim's English, or comment disparagingly on the quality of their victim's appearances or voices, which is what Maricela C. was describing in her original comment. Of course, as might be expected, sport trolling often includes nitpicking as an element of the overall contest for superiority. However, another somewhat more complex form of nitpicking trolling occurs when a troll critiques one small tangential part of something much larger. For instance, I've noticed that nitpicking trolling occurs fairly frequently in people's comments about music videos, and for some reason, especially in videos that feature performances of classical music. For example, there'll be a breathtaking performance of, say, Rachmaninoff's Second Piano Concerto, and some troll will blather on for a paragraph about how the phrase at 10 minutes and 23 seconds should have been played a little bit more slowly, and that the entire performance is therefore a mediocre piece of trash, etc., etc. The fourth kind of trolling, which I find is incredibly common these days, is what I call ideological trolling. Here, the troll's goal is to advance an ideological position or agenda, mostly by denigrating its possible alternatives. It's a way of asserting the troll's own supposed ideological superiority at the expense of other people's perspectives and experience. These days, I find that a lot of this kind of trolling is political in nature, and it generates the whole unseemly right-wing vocabulary of cucks, libtards, and snowflakes, as well as the equally unseemly left-wing hyperbole about fascists, racists, and Nazis. However, ideological trolling can also play out across many other kinds of terrain, such as that of people's religions, their sexual orientations, you name it. And finally, the fifth kind of trolling is what I call comedic trolling. Here, the troll's goal is to mock or deride his or her victims. Basically, it's a way of trolling victims by making fun of them. Of course, the point of comedic trolling is not to make the victim laugh, but to make the surrounding audience of onlookers laugh at the victim's expense. And while much of all internet trolling is about getting attention by playing to an audience, in the case of comedic trolling, it's especially evident. Okay, now that we've briefly outlined 5 primary kinds of trolling, let's take a look at trolling in its generality. The thing to remember about pretty much all trolling is that in one way or another, it's a way of trying to prop up someone's supposed superiority by putting down other people. And the paradoxical nature of trolling, which trolls hardly ever seem to realize, is that it almost always says more about the troll than it does about the troll's victim. After all, underneath all of the sound and fury, there's always the nagging question about the kind of person that would feel a need to assert his or her supposed superiority over others in the first place. Who would that person be if not someone who at some level feels a fairly acute deficit of that kind of self-esteem? In other words, when we feel fundamentally good about life, we're probably not going to be feeling too much need to go around demeaning other people in the first place. And when trolling involves getting attention from an audience, as it often does, the paradox is that by trying hard to convince an audience that they're winners, trolls actually reveal themselves to be desperate losers. This is also why trolls can hardly ever bring themselves to admit that they're wrong, even when it's painfully obvious. They almost always have to be right because their fragile sense of superiority is what's really at stake in the act of trolling. But these sorts of habits and dynamics, however nettlesome they may be, are in the end something very human. After all, who among us is immune from the warm thrill of putting down others to lay claim to our own supposed superiority? Well, okay, maybe Thich Nhat Hanh has evolved beyond it, but to varying degrees the other 99+% of us haven't. And at the same time, don't practically all of us feel the impish desire to troll the world, at least now and then. True, it may not be the most mature or most noble part of our humanity, but for most of us, it's there nonetheless. Consequently, it seems to me that it would be a mistake simply to ascribe the trolling impulse to some deficient or supposedly pathological subclass of humanity, as the word troll would itself suggest. In reality, we pretty much all know some measure of it. It's just that some of us are better at repressing or sublimating it than others are. However, in addition to that, it seems to me that another reason why there's so much trolling in the world has to do with the fact that we live in times that are incredibly repressive, and especially so with respect to the ideal of free speech. That is, in our world, it's mostly deemed inappropriate to give voice to our shadow selves, to the ugly, unreasonable regions of our humanity. For instance, the hard reality of our world is that most of us can be summarily fired just for making the wrong tweet or wearing the wrong t-shirt. So the question is, where do all of those repressed impulses go when they're being systematically censored? Personally, I think that they're mostly being channeled in 2 directions. First, they're being channeled into the political sphere, where they propel people into power who unabashedly express what's been decreed inappropriate for everyone else. And second, they're being channeled into the internet, where people can freely express that side of human nature anonymously and safely, largely in the form of trolling of various sorts. In this regard, in both the political sphere and elsewhere, trolling is not merely an irritating anomaly, but an integral part of the structural conditions of our world, and a symptom of our world's repressive values and direction. Trolling is merely the inevitable return of the part of human nature that we're trying hard to stifle and eradicate. But beyond all of this, it seems to me that trolling also has a positive side, beyond its rather meager entertainment value. The positive value of trolling is that it can help us become less hypersensitive and thin-skinned about things. That's because trolling can help us learn that there's nothing inherently wrong or bad about encountering opinions and expressions that we find annoying. It's all just people being people. And anyhow, other people's job isn't to go around avoiding things that we feel are disagreeable and inappropriate. Consequently, trolling can invite us to let go of a lot of our overblown outrage reactions, and instead simply move toward the parts of life that we find genuinely fulfilling. That's important because it seems to me that we live in times where wallowing in the sensation of outrage is, well, all the rage. And our corresponding level of personal entitlement has become so overinflated that we routinely expect the world to take it seriously and kowtow to it. All of this doesn't seem particularly healthy to me. First, because living in a state of perpetual outrage and entitlement tends to deflect us away from life's deeper possibilities, most of which play out along the dimension of personal and collective metamorphosis. Outrage is basically a way of staying stuck in an infantile posture toward life, which would expect the world to change according to our whims. And in any case, the deeper reality of life is that people are going to be what they are, whether we like it or not. So, trolling is a positive phenomenon because it can remind us to keep all of that in perspective, because it can help us remember that our own sensibilities are just that, our own, and not the self-evidently correct template for everyone else's values and lives. Just a thought. Enjoy the day.